on two important applications. The first vote is to approve with modifications LU's number 181 relating to the City of Yes for housing opportunity. The second vote is to approve LU's numbers 185 to 187 relating to the redesign of the Port Authority bus terminal. Starting with the City of Yes for housing opportunity, this is the last of three major initiatives by the administration. The first initiative was City of Yes for carbon neutrality, which the council modified and adopted last year. The second initiative was City of Yes for economic opportunity this year. The goal of this third initiative is to help address the housing crisis that the city is facing and refresh outdated housing regulations. As I discussed when we held the public hearing last month for this initiative, our communities are facing a very real housing crisis that is both large enough for their families and affordable. We know the cause of this. New York City has not been building enough. This has led to the historical low vacancy rate of just 1.4%. This means 98.6% of the available apartments are occupied. It is no surprise families are having a hard time finding a home and moving out of the city. Another major cause of this housing crisis is that the income of most New Yorkers has not kept up with inflation and rent increases. To make matters worse, the number of available apartments available for less than $1,500 is steadily decreasing. So the data is clear. The city has a housing crisis. The question is, how should the city go about solving this problem? The administration has put forward a complicated set of reforms to create more housing. I want to recognize the extraordinary effort that our community boards, neighborhood associations, advocates, council members, and council staff have made to understand and analyze the administration's proposal, which is over 1,300 pages. We have received volumes of very helpful input from every corner of the city, from other cities, and from experts throughout the country. What is clear, based on all the input council has received, is that the housing and the ecosystem that is dependent on multiple competing factors. Let me give you some examples. New York City is a coastal city, and the sea level is rising. Groundwater tables are also rising. To make matters worse, rainfall events are becoming more severe, causing more inland flooding. This raises the question, what type of housing should be built and where? We have an obligation to make sure new housing is safe and that our city is a resilient one. In some areas, this new infrastructure is needed before any more density can be added. The flooding happening in parts of the Bronx, Queens, and Brooklyn is well established. We know that the city must address this flooding through new infrastructure investment. The question becomes, is the administration willing to provide this new infrastructure for these neighborhoods? Another factor we must consider is access. Families need access to jobs, grocery stores, schools, and doctors, just to name a few essentials. If the new housing is far away from public transit, how will these families access these essential services? Will they be dependent on a car? If a car is needed, then should parking requirements be reduced to make way for even more housing? Let's also talk about a neighborhood's built character. The character of a neighborhood is important. For many New Yorkers, it is the reason they move to their homes. This is true across different neighborhoods, whether it be historic districts, one or two family home neighborhoods, mid-density districts with homes between 5 to 7 stories, brownstone neighborhoods, or high-density residential district with specific architectural features. Each neighborhood in New York City offers something different, and this diversity of housing is a defining element of our great city. So the question here is, how do we preserve the rich diversity in the city's neighborhoods while still making sure every community board contributes not just more market housing, but also affordable housing? Another major priority to consider is open space. According to some estimates, there is as little as 146 square feet of green space per New Yorker. Think about that for a moment. Each New Yorker only has about 12 feet by 12 foot of open space, that this open space is not even fairly distributed throughout the city. LA has 3 times this amount. ATL 7 times this amount. Therefore, preserving the open space on large developments and in backyards is critical for the well-being of our constituents. Each of these factors that I just mentioned, climate change, infrastructure, access, a diversity of housing options, and open space, must be considered in figuring out how to solve the city's housing crisis. And this is exactly what we did as a subcommittee when reviewing the administration's proposed reforms. I am now going to explain how the subcommittee is recommending to modify the City of Yes for Housing Opportunity proposal to take into account each of these competing objectives. In finding the right balance between these objectives, we reviewed the detailed submission by the community boards and elected officials. We also considered over 1,300 written comments submitted by the public. Besides these formal submissions, many and long meetings were held with communities in person and virtually. The council conducted the largest public engagement effort of any land use application since I have been chair of this subcommittee. We listened, starting with the 4 major citywide reforms that the administration is proposing. First, I want to discuss the administration's affordability proposal, known as Universal Affordability Preference, UAP. It will create a citywide program to enable the creation of permanent affordable housing. It is intended to work with the new property tax exemption known as 485X, which the state passed. UAP will require new development to set aside 20% of units at 60% AMI, which is a household income of $93,000 for a family of 4. This will create much needed new permanent affordable housing and is a step in the right direction. Many families do not make this much money and they need housing too. The modification here is to require buildings containing more than 10,000 square feet of affordable floor area, that 20% of the affordable units be for families making 40% AMIs, which is $62,000 for a family of 4. This is much more aligned with the actual income of families within the Bronx. The next citywide proposal we are modifying is the reform to allow landmark buildings to transfer their unused development rights. This reform is also a step in the right direction because landmarks are beloved by everyone and maintain the cultural heritage of our great city. Facilitating the transfer of density from landmark buildings is a way to preserve these buildings by allowing them to raise the needed funds to maintain the buildings. The reform will facilitate these transfers by requiring less process. The issue is that this reform will also allow the site receiving the additional density to increase its height without seeking a special permit that requires community board and borough president's review and a council's vote. This could lead to development that could be disproportionately higher compared to the zoning district they are in. More importantly, it will weaken the community's input. If a development does not want to follow the applicable regulations, it needs to seek the community and council's review. This is why we are reinstating the special permit for any building receiving a density increase from a landmark building that wants to increase its height more than 25% of what it is allowed. The third citywide proposal that should be modified relates to the ability to add buildings on a lot that is already developed, also known as campus infill development. A common type of development throughout the city is 2 or more buildings on a large lot. Many of these large developments are facing financial difficulties due to the needed facade repairs and electrical retrofits. Infill developments could provide the additional needed funds and more housing. There are also community facility buildings such as churches and educational facilities that have vacant land. In talking with communities who live in around campus sites, their concern is that the access to existing open space on these campuses is a valuable and needed resource. If as a city, we're going to facilitate infill development, then we need to protect outdoor space used for recreational purposes. This is exactly why This is exactly what our modification does. It also requires that a minimum percentage of the lot not be developed and that the height of any new infill buildings not exceed the height of existing buildings on the lot. The fourth citywide proposal, District Fixes, seeks to provide a little more flexibility in how the shape and size of buildings are regulated. Currently, there are many buildings that do not conform in the existing regulations because of the regulations, because the regulations were amended after the buildings were constructed. This is preventing homeowners and building owners from making small changes, reasonable changes to their building. While broadly speaking, the aim of the additional flexibility makes sense, some of these changes need to be scaled back, specifically to protect people's access to open space. Rear yards and side yards play an important role in people's daily lives. We need to preserve this access to the outdoors. Our modification recommends that we do not reduce lot size and lot width as much as proposed. Scale back the proposed reduction and encroachment into rear and side yards, maintain a 30-foot rear yard requirement for row houses and semi-detached houses on smaller lots. Smaller buildings. I will next discuss how we consider the three primary reforms in the city's low-density districts, starting with the administration's transit-oriented development, TOD. The reform proposes to allow 3 to 5 story developments in low-density communities. To qualify for TOD, a site must be 5,000 square feet in lot area and on a wide street or short block and within a half of a mile of a mass transit station. While this is an important tool to add housing to low-density neighborhoods, it should also be mapped where the train line and stations are designed to accommodate commuters. It should also consider where people in each community are working and how people are commuting to their jobs. Besides looking at commuting patterns, the shape, size, and density of the proposed new development should also be compatible with the surrounding homes. Our modifications are based on these considerations. First, we are removing single-family zone districts from TOD areas because the area restricted to single-family homes were not planned for 3 to family story buildings. One-family home districts represent less than 15% of the city's land area, and they are scattered in small areas throughout the city. They are a valuable resource to the city in terms of maintaining the diversity of housing choices for New Yorkers. For some households, having access to a yard, a garage, and owning a piece of land is an important goal, and we do not want to drive away these New Yorkers. New York City has been defined by different types of neighborhoods for over 2 centuries, and we want to maintain the unique aspect of the city. Apartment buildings are more appropriate building type in 2 and multifamily districts, which are intended and designed for bigger buildings and more density. Second, we are reducing the TOD area toward the end of the LIRR and the Metro North stations from a half-a-mile radius to a quarter-mile radius. This change reflects the reality of how people commute. The ability to commute using public transportation is not the same throughout New York City. All the subway and regional lines are not the same and do not provide the same type of access. Where we reduce the TOD area, the existing community patterns and the cost and the frequency of the trains are different than mass transit stations. The trains are less frequent, the cost of a ticket exceeds subway fares, and many families who live in these areas do not simply commute by train into Manhattan, downtown Brooklyn, or Long Island City for work. Families in these areas are much more car dependent to access jobs scattered throughout the city and surrounding counties. In the 50s and 60s, the city decided to place public housing and working class homes in places that were not easily accessible. This was not only discriminatory, but a total failure. Under my watch, I will not encourage housing in any place that are not accessible to jobs and essential services for everyday New Yorkers. Town centers is the second of the proposal that will allow 3 to 5 story development in low density districts, in this case on the streets where commercial overlay zoning. Like TOD, The size of a new building in town center areas will depend on the existing zoning. One intent of this proposal is to allow walk-up apartment buildings on main commercial streets in low-density communities. Two very valid concerns regarding this proposal have been raised. There are some blocks that may have a commercial overlay, but today are actually built as mostly 1- and 2-family homes without commercial uses. Our modification would remove this type of block from town center eligibility. The other concern is that there are some areas where commercial zoning is mapped only over a single isolated block surrounded by a residential neighborhood. Creating a single block of an apartment among 1- and 2-family homes was not the intent of this proposal and would be inconsistent with the surrounding area. As a result, we are removing single isolated commercial overlay block from the proposal. For both town centers and TODs, the council repeatedly heard concerns about the lack of any requirement for affordability. The message from communities were clear. We just don't have a housing crisis, we have a housing affordability crisis. The proposed modification will introduce an affordability requirement for large developments of approximately 50 units or larger, with approximately 20% of FAR reserved for permanent affordable housing at an average of 80% AMI. Developers will only be able to reach their full FAR if affordable units are included. This modification is the first time such an affordability program has been used in the low-density district. The amount and level of affordability were carefully considered to be financially viable for both rental and home ownership developments. The third major reform in the low-density district is the introduction of ADUs. This will be an entirely new housing type in New York City. ADUs come in many forms, each with their own characteristics that need to be considered separately from other types. These main ADU types include detached backyard structures, rear or side additions to the main house, attic apartments, and basement units. Some of these ADU types are located inside an existing building footprint, such as a basement or attic ADU. Other types are located in the backyard, such as detached, standalone ADUs, and attached ADU home extension. As proposed, these ADUs will be permitted up to 800 square feet and one per house, whether it be a 1- or 2-family house. The response we heard to this ADU proposal highlighted several issues: the lack of infrastructure to service current density in certain areas of the city, flood risk concerns, introducing a new housing type that would be out of character in housing districts with distinct architectural features, and questions over cost and maintenance for average homeowners. While the proposal does not allow basement ADUs in the coastal flood zone, it does not address inland flooding or sea level rise, which are two significant emissions. Communities with inland flood risks already do not have the needed infrastructure to adequately service current residents. Before we add any more housing in these areas, let's first solve the existing flooding problem. The administration here is putting the cart before the horse. Excuse me, I said that wrong. The administration here is putting the cart before the horse. Putting more basement and ground level housing in flood zone is not sound planning policy. Similarly, it is not enough to just plan for the 100-year coastal floodplain as proposed by the administration. As a city, we also need to plan for sea level rises. Whether we like it or not, the sea level surrounding the city is rising, and so is the groundwater table. As such, we are modifying the administration proposal to prohibit ground floor ADUs, both detached and attached extension, and basement ADUs in both the coastal flooding zone areas and areas identified by the city as vulnerable to inland flooding for heavy rainfall. By excluding the basement and ground level detached ADUs from areas projected to be impacted by the sea level rise and inland flooding, we are taking responsible steps to make our city more resilient. Another major concern is introducing a completely new type of housing in the backyard of existing neighborhood. Backyard ADUs, both detached and attached, will have much more of an impact on the building character of a neighborhood than any other type of ADUs which are located inside an existing house. Recognizing this difference, the council will modify where the backyard ADUs can be located, prohibiting them in historic districts and in contextual low-density one-family home districts with a well-defined built environment. Even here, however, we are taking the need for all neighborhoods to contribute more housing seriously. And backyard and attached ADUs will be allowed in these contextual districts if they are near public transit stations. As I said earlier, access is a key factor in determining whether additional housing should be planned. The other impact that needs to be considered with backyard ADUs is the reduction of valuable open space. This is why the council is prohibiting ADUs from covering more than 33% of a rear yard and making sure ADUs are one story unless they provide parking on the first story. One of the primary reasons for introducing ADUs in New York City is that it will allow families to live with relatives such as grandparents and grown children. Another benefit can be to help families get an additional income stream. However, both of these goals are undercut if the institutional buyers are allowed to develop these ADUs, using both the ADU and the home as rental properties. This is why the council is introducing a homeowner occupancy requirement, which requires that a homeowner live on the property when the ADU is first built. Next, we will talk about the council's response to the City of Yes for Housing Opportunity proposal for the elimination of all parking requirements in Citywide. First, we must recognize the importance of access to parking and car transportation varies across New York City. New York City is a very large city, and some areas of the city are not well serviced by public transportation. I'll say that one more time because a lot of people don't understand that. New York City is a very large city, and some areas of the city are not well serviced by public transportation. Is this fair? No. Should residents in this badly serviced areas be penalized further? No. I live in one of these areas. You need a car to get groceries, grab coffee, or go to the doctor, and bring your kids to the park or a play date. Our modifications reflect this reality, our constituents' reality. We are recommending that 3 different parking zones be created. Zone 1, where parking requirements will be fully eliminated for new buildings, will apply to neighborhoods that have very good access to transit, low commute times, and higher shares of commuters to Manhattan. Manhattan south of 96th Street is already excluded from any parking requirements. This zone will now include community districts 9, 10, and 11 in Manhattan, 1 and 2 in Queens, and most of Western Queens and Brooklyn community districts 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, and 8. In addition, existing buildings in Zone 1 will be able to remove parking through the proposed City Planning Commission. Zone 1 will lift parking requirements for the most people of any city in the United States. Zone 2 will cover areas of the city with access to public transit but different commuting patterns than Zone 1. In that families in Zone 2 commute less in Manhattan for work than families in Zone 1 and depend more on a car. In Zone 2, parking requirements for multifamily developments will be significantly reduced for current levels, while parking requirements for 1 to 2 family homes will remain in place. Finally, in Zone 3, areas beyond other geographies, geographies, I'm getting tired right now. With great car dependencies, parking requirements will be only modestly reduced and mostly maintained as they are today. In all 3 zones, certain types of developments that might be infeasible if parking were to be required will be exempt. These include office to residential conversion and ADUs, as well as TODs and town center districts of less than 75 units. Finally, I'd like to touch on an important issue, preservation of a community's voice. As you can see in my remarks today, community voice is essential as it allows the council to act on community concerns and allows input into land use by those who know their community best. Before going into the ways that council is modifying the proposal to preserve community input, I wanted to explain the administration's proposal does not take away or change the ULURP process. This proposal seeks to scale back the requirement for certain special permits that currently require community input and council's vote. The proposal is to replace these special permits with authorizations, which is a process that allows the CPC to modify certain zoning requirements without the council's review. This is not acceptable. We need to modify the proposal to maintain these special permits and maintain community's input. I just discussed a lot of information. We'll be posting the materials on the council's planning and land use webpage that explain the modifications that we are recommending. I hope your main takeaway today is that we listen to our communities and that we carefully review the administration's proposal, and that we are recommending modifications to reflect the actual lived reality of New Yorkers. Planning should not be a theoretical exercise or wishful thinking. It needs to reflect the actual built environment of our neighborhoods and be responsive to the challenges our constituents face every day. Okay. That was a lot. All right. Before I discuss the next vote, council, are there any council members with questions, remarks at this time? Members appearing remotely can use the raise hand function. Councilmember Carr.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair Riley. I'd like to take this opportunity, pursuant to Section 9.110 of the Rules of the Council, to move to amend the motion to approve LU 181 2024 with modifications to be a motion to disapprove.
Councilmember Carr, you have to wait till we call the vote to make the motion, so I'll come back to you, okay?
Okay, no problem.
We are also voting today to approve LUs 185 through 187 relating to the Port Authority Bus Terminal Replacement Project. Millions of commuters and visitors rely on the bus terminal to access the city. The existing terminal is unwelcoming, over capacity, and increasingly obsolete. It needs a complete redesign, and today that is exactly why we are approving the needed zoning changes to make this work possible. As you can imagine, the bus terminal cannot simply be shut down. This will require a complicated, multi-phase, multi-year process. The proposal includes 3 actions. The first action is to demap portions of the certain streets around the terminal area to allow for a cohesive design. The second action is a zoning text amendment that will allow the Port Authority to construct the proposed design through a special permit. And the third action is the special permit application. With the approval of these 3 actions, the much needed redesign of the Port Authority bus terminal will hopefully start without delay. I will now call for a vote to approve with modifications LUs 181 relating to the City of Yes for Housing Opportunity Text Amendment, and to approve LUs 185 through 187 relating to the Port Authority Bus Terminal application. Councilmember Carr.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try that one more time. Pursuant to Section 9.110, I move to amend the motion to approve LU 181 2024 with modifications to a motion to disapprove.
Thank you. So there's a motion before the subcommittee. Councilmember Carr, you have 2 minutes to explain your motion.
Thank you, Chair and colleagues. The motion is simple. The purpose and the effect would be to replace the 1,300 plus pages that the Chair referenced in his opening remarks with one word: no. No to a uniform land use review process that began with a preordained conclusion by this administration. No to a process that solicited communities and community boards for their comment and feedback, only for it to be mostly ignored. No to a process that did not begin with infrastructure carefully planned as it should, and now involves a mad dash to capture whatever dollars we think we can get on a commitment that may never be made good on. No to a process that tries to tell hardworking, blue-collar residents across the city what their neighborhood should look like and that they have not been doing enough for a housing crisis. No one denies that the housing crisis exists. Indeed, this council institutionally has certified one exists for decades. It is not new. And there's absolutely a lot that we can do to address that particular concern. But this process is not the one to do it. This process, which the administration claims is going to result in a little bit of housing everywhere, and yet somehow will not tax our already overtaxed infrastructure, simply does not make sense. So the no today is not a no to more housing. It's not a no to a conversation. It's not even an end to the conversation on housing that we've been embarking on for the last several years. It's an opportunity to begin anew a conversation about housing the right way, one that involves actually consulting our neighborhoods and putting them first, working with them contextually to achieve housing goals across the city, and most importantly, to get infrastructure commitments up front so that we know that they can be made good on in the years to come as we work with this administration and any in the future in order to ensure that we have the infrastructure needs that our communities require. And so with that, I ask my colleagues to vote yes on my motion in order to amend this to be a motion to disapprove LU 181, City of Yes, CHO. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Carr. Are there any members of the committee who wish to speak on Councilmember Carr's motion? Members will be given 2 minutes to speak. Councilmember Hanks, Chair Hanks, excuse me.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to associate my comments with my colleague, Councilmember David Carr. When we started this process, it was in good faith. It would have been easier to say, we want to allow for 5,000 units of housing per district, and how are we going to get there? Staten Island is not the Bronx, it is not Brooklyn, it is not Queens, it is not Manhattan. We don't have the same issues, and we do not have the same infrastructure, we do not have the same transit-oriented, whatever these districts are. We do not have that. And so I think what we're trying to say is that the City of Yes started a very, very important conversation. And that conversation is talking about how we want to plan each of our neighborhoods. But what it lacked is how we are going to do that with the respect and the understanding of each of our individual neighborhoods. So while I thank that this process happened, I would like to vote yes on his motion.
Thank you, Chair Hanks. Any other members? Okay. The question before the committee is whether the question posed to the committee should be converted from a recommendation to approve with modifications to a recommendation to disapprove LU's 181. I'm going to urge my colleagues to vote no on this motion. I just explained in detail how we are modifying the proposed reform to make it into a housing proposal that will actually support our communities. Our communities need housing, and we have worked hard to find a reasonable way to achieve this goal. So I strongly urge that we vote no on this motion and get back to actually solving the housing crisis of our constituents that they are facing each and every single day. So I'm going to ask Council, can you please call the roll for this vote?
And just to be clear, we are at this time just voting on Councilmember Carr's motion.
Yes.
Chair Riley, how do you vote?
No.
Councilmember Moya?
I vote no.
Councilmember Abreu?
No.
Councilmember Hanks, Chair Hanks?
I vote aye.
Councilmember Shulman?
No.
Councilmember Salam?
I vote no.
Councilmember Carr?
Aye.
Five to 2, the motion fails. We can now proceed with the original votes.
Thank you. I will now call for a vote to approve with modifications LU's 181 related to City of Yes for Housing Opportunity Text Amendment and to approve LUs 185 through 187 relating to the Port Authority bus terminal application. Council, please call the roll.
Okay, I just will remind the council members we are voting on two different items, so if you are not voting straight yes or no across, please let us know which one you're voting yes and no to. Okay, so let's start this over. Chair Riley,
Yes.
Councilmember Moya,
I vote aye.
Councilmember Abreu,
Permission to explain my vote.
Permission granted.
Today wasn't about achieving anyone's perfect vision. This bill isn't exactly what any of us would have drafted alone, but that's the nature of democracy. It's about negotiation, compromise, and the hope that the final product moves us forward. What's undeniable here is the magnitude of the financial commitment we've secured. $5 billion dedicated to affordable housing. This is transformative. I want to thank the Speaker's office for complimenting the City of Yes. Addressing our housing crisis has never been more urgent. Too many New Yorkers are living on the edge, struggling to find or keep a home they can afford. City of Yes is a step toward ensuring every family has the stability and dignity that housing provides. By passing the City of Yes, we will be a better city tomorrow than we were yesterday. I vote aye.
Chair Hanks,
We say no to the City of Yes. This is bullshit. We say no to the City of Yes. You study
Sergeant, can you please remove?
You study out New York. You fucking sell out. That's what you are.
Sergeant, can you please remove?
You too, son of a-
okay, do you want to say something?
Quiet, please. Quiet, please. Quiet, please. Thank you.
Okay, so returning to the vote here on the two projects that we discussed earlier, we were at Chair Hanks.
Permission to explain my vote?
Permission granted.
Thank you, Chair. The City of Yes for Housing Opportunity set out to be a solution for our city's housing and zoning challenges. And for the most part, it did that in certain boroughs. However, it falls short for a borough like Staten Island in achieving its stated goals, and it fails to adequately address the unique challenges of my district. One significant concern lies with the exemptions for the accessory dwelling units, the R1 and 2A and R2A and R3A districts. While these exemptions are a good starting point, they fail to consider the unique nature of Staten Island zoning realities, and many of our historic neighborhoods simply will be opened to, they'll be vulnerable under and unprotected under this current plan. But I do want to take this opportunity to thank Paris Straughter, who did an extraordinary job. I want to thank our civic associations, urban planners, and their perspectives were critical in shaping this discussion and ensuring that Staten Island's voice was heard. In conclusion, I must vote no on LU item 181 due to these unresolved issues, but aye on all the rest. Thank you very much, Chair.
And sorry, Chair Hanks, just to confirm how you're voting on
Voting
Port
no, sorry, I vote no.
Authority? On both
On 181?
projects? Okay.
And aye on all the rest, I
Okay,
said that.
that's what I didn't hear,
Yes.
sorry. My apologies. Councilmember Shulman?
Permission to explain my vote?
Permission granted.
Thank you. First, I want to say that I'm voting yes on the Port Authority, so just so you have that.
Thank you.
First, I want to commend Speaker Adrian Adams and the land use staff and the Speaker's staff for putting together the changes that they did for the City of Yes. I mean, it was quite extraordinary. They didn't have a lot of time to do it, and I think they made a lot of major advancements on it. But you know, we haven't changed the zoning text since 1961, and so this is a major undertaking, and it's being rushed through, I think, in a lot of different ways. And so I still have major reservations about it, just like Robert Moses way back was thought to be a miracle worker when he changed the infrastructure of New York City, and now We're in the process of trying to undo some of the damage that was done then. I don't want to see the same damage done with the city of Yes, and I won't be here in 50 years, but my niece and nephew will. And I also heard very loud the voices of my constituents, so I vote no on the city of Yes.
Councilmember Salam.
I vote aye on all.
Councilmember Carr.
Permission to explain my vote?
Permission granted.
Thank you, Chair. You know, I spoke when I made my motion earlier, but I just want to add some local color to the reasons why I'm opposing this. You know, I come from a community that is home to people who chose to leave where they came from, usually other parts of the city, in order to find a better quality of life. And that's what's been motivating my approach, and the same is true for the Southwest Brooklyn constituents I represent. These are neighborhood characters that have served generations of families well. There's absolutely opportunities to find new housing within them, but this is not the correct approach. And there have been a number of times where my council delegation and our other colleagues came forward and said we were willing to meet the administration and find a way to meet housing goals, but in a way that respected neighborhood context, in a way that respected local infrastructure needs. And those, you know, offers were not taken up on. And it's a shame because there was a way for us to contribute to the housing stock need, but at the same time doing so in a way that was careful and considerate of neighborhood context. We need to put neighborhoods first in these conversations, and the council, by design of the charter, is meant to be a champion of the local, rather than give way to the pressures of the executive branch who have a citywide basis. And that's unfortunately what we're acquiescing to by really putting forward, from my perspective, minimal accommodations to the local concerns that were articulated by my communities. But most importantly, I think what's at play here is that this is a mapping action masquerading as a text amendment. And that there was no environmental due diligence done for a mapping action, but we are in effect creating new mapping districts through the transit-oriented development, through so many other aspects of this plan. And so I do not believe that the environmental due diligence was done, and I do not believe that this plan could survive a quarter challenge, and very likely may not survive one if it comes to fruition. Thank you, Chair, and with that said, I vote no on LU 181 and aye on the rest.
Thank you, Councilmember. By a vote of 4 in the affirmative, 3 opposing, and 0 abstention, the items are approved and referred to the full Land Use Committee regarding LU 181 related to the City of Yes for housing opportunity, regarding LU 185 through 187 relating to the Port Authority bus terminal application. By a vote of 7 in the affirmative, 0 opposition, and no abstention, the items are approved and referred to the also to the full Land Use Committee. Chair.
That concludes today's business. Just want to confirm that the votes have been closed. I would like to thank the members of the public, my colleagues, Subcommittee Council, Land Use, and other council staff, and the Sergeant at Arms participating in today's meeting. This meeting is hereby adjourned. Thank you.